All right, guys. We are live once again. I mean, I know you guys are alive. That's what matters. All right. We are on day 220. And tomorrow we're going to have a new camera. So hopefully we'll be back on track and be able to do what we need to do and do it in a good way. Because these things it takes a lot of technology to do a live stream. I mean, you can just jump on Facebook and do one, but when you're streaming on multiple platforms like we are, there's a lot more involved in it. And you got to have the right lighting and all that good stuff. So anyway, we'll do with what we can today. When you jump on here, let me know where you're watching from and what platform you're watching from. We're finding that the best views are from the Soul Purpose Ministries Facebook page. But we're also on YouTube, Soul Purpose Ministry. Look up SOLE Purpose Ministries. And Twitter, my Twitter. And then the Daily Bible Reading with Linda Weber. And my regular Facebook, Linda Ross Weber Facebook page. So we're on 5 different platforms right now. But if you'll jump on the Soul Purpose Facebook page, that should be the best. All right, I'm not going to do a lot of preliminary stuff here. We're going to jump right into it. We're on day 220 of the Daily Bible Reading, and we're going to start out in Judges. Today I'm going to read out of the Living Bible. I'm going to jump back to that. I really like that new Bible, that Amplified Classic version. And my kids bought it for me for my birthday. It was Dr. Rodney Howard Brown's version or Bible. And so it's been a really good study Bible too. It's hard to kind of just read out of the Amplified Classic because it expounds so much more. You take one word and it expounds on it. So it's a great study Bible. Get the Amplified, get the Classic. Not the Amplified Bible, just get the Amplified Classic version. And it's a much better version. All right. I'm going to go on the chat. I know it's probably not a good time to jump on here, but that's okay. We're going to read, and a lot of people watch the replay. Which that's good too. Tomorrow we'll get the new camera set up. All right. Let's go to Judges chapter 9. We've already read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and now we're in Judges. 7th book of the Bible, of the Old Testament, if you go from the beginning. And, and then we'll go over to the New Testament and read today we're going to read in James chapter 3. And we're also going to read Psalm chapter 39. All right. One day, Gideon's son Abimelech visited his uncles, his mother's brothers, in Shechem. Now, remember, Abimelech was Gideon's son through his concubine. All right? So, and his mother's family was from Shechem. So go and talk to the leaders of Shechem, he requested, and ask them whether they want to be ruled by 70 kings, because Gideon's sons, the 70 sons, were ruling, or by one man, meaning me, your own flesh and blood. So his uncles went to the leaders of the city and proposed Abimelech's scheme. And they decided that since his mother was a native of their town, they would go along with it. They gave him money from the temple offerings of the idol Baal Berith. They gave him 70 silver shekels, okay? So they gave him money from the temple offering, 70 silver shekels, of the idol Baal Berith, which he used to hire some worthless loafers who agreed to do whatever he told them to. He took them to his father's home at Ophrah, and there, upon one, they slaughtered all 70 of his half-brothers, except for the youngest, Jotham, who escaped and hid. Then the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo called a meeting under the oak beside the garrison at Shechem, and Abimelech was acclaimed king of Israel. So Gideon's 70 sons were ruling Shechem, and then Abimelech, which is Gideon's son from his concubine, he went and he decided instead of those 70 ruling, he was going to rule, because that was his mother's people anyway in Shechem. And then so he went, and they gave him 70 silver shekels, and he took that money, hired some bums, and they went and killed all 70 of Abimelech's half brothers who were ruling. When Jotham heard about this, he stood at the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted across to the men of Shechem, "If you want God's blessing, listen to me. Once upon a time, the trees decided to elect a king. First, they asked the olive tree, but it refused. Should I quit producing the olive oil that blesses God and man just to wave to and fro over the other trees?" it asked. Then they said to the fig tree, "You be our king." But the fig tree also refused. "Should I quit producing sweetness and fruit just to lift my head above all the other trees?" it asked. Then they said to the grapevine, "You reign over us." But the grapevine replied, "Shall I quit producing the wine that cheers both God and man just to be mightier than all the other trees?" Then all the trees finally turned to the thorn bush. "You be our king," they exclaimed. And the thorn bush replied, "If you really want me, come and humble yourselves beneath my shade. If you refuse, let fire flame forth from me and burn down the great cedars of Lebanon. Now make sure that you have done the right thing in making Abimelech your king, that you have done right by Gideon and all of his descendants. For my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the Midianites. Yet you have revolted against him and killed his 70 sons upon one stone. And now you have chosen his slave girl's son, Abimelech, to be your king, just because he's your relative. And if you are sure that you have done right by Gideon and his descendants, then may you and Abimelech have a long and happy life together. But if you have not been fair to Gideon, then may Abimelech destroy the cities of Shechem and Beth Milo, and may they destroy Abimelech." And that's what's going to happen. You know, if you want to be a ruler, a leader, then you need to be a good leader, you know, and you should have good motives for wanting to be a leader, not so you could be lifted up and praised, but so that you could help the people. And that was the example that he gave with the 3 trees, you know. All right, then Jotham escaped and lived in Beer for fear of his brother Abimelech. 3 years later, God stirred up trouble between King Abimelech and the cities of Shechem, and they revolted. In the events that followed, both Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, who aided him in butchering Gideon's 70 sons, were given their just punishment for these murders. For the men of Shechem set an ambush for Abimelech along the trail at the top of the mountain. While they were waiting for him to come along, they robbed everyone else who passed that way. But someone warned Abimelech about their plot. At that time, Gaal, the son of Ebed, moved to Shechem with his brothers, and he became one of the leading citizens. During the harvest feast at Shechem that year, held in the temple of the local god, the wine flowed freely, and everyone began cursing Abimelech. "Who is Abimelech?" Gaal shouted, "and why should he be our king? Why should we be his servants? He and his friend Zebul should be our servants. Down with Abimelech. Make me your king, and you'll soon see what happens to Abimelech. I'll tell Abimelech, get up an army and come on out and fight." But when Zebul, the mayor of the city, heard what Gaal was saying, he was furious. He sent messengers to Abimelech in Arumah, telling him, "Gaal, son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to live in Shechem, and now they are arousing the city to rebellion against you. Come by night with an army and hide out in the fields, and in the morning, as soon as it is daylight, storm the city. When he and those who are with him come out against you, you can do with them as you wish." So Abimelech and his men marched through the night and split into 4 groups, stationing themselves around the city. The next morning, as Gaal sat at the city gates, discussing various issues with the local leaders, Abimelech and his men began their march upon the city. When Gaal saw them, he exclaimed to Zebul, "Look over at that mountain. Doesn't it look like people coming down?" "No," Zebul said, "you're just seeing shadows that look like men." "No, look over there," Gaal said. "I'm sure I see people coming toward us. And look, there are others coming along the road past the oak of Meon." Then Zebul turned on him triumphantly. "Now where is that big mouth of yours?" he demanded. "Who was it who said, 'Who is Abimelech and why should he be our king?' The men you taunted and cursed are right outside the city. Go on out and fight." So Gaal led the men of Shechem into the battle and fought with Abimelech. But he was defeated, and many of the men of Shechem were left wounded all the way to the city gate. Abimelech was living at Arumah at this time, and Zebul drove Gaal and his relatives out of Shechem and wouldn't let them live there any longer. The next day, the men of Shechem went out to battle again. However, someone had told Abimelech about their plans, so he had divided his men into 3 groups hiding in the fields. And when the men of the city went out to attack, he and his men jumped up from their hiding places and began killing them. Abimelech stormed the city gate to keep the men of Shechem from getting back in, while his other 2 groups cut them down in the fields. The battle went on all day before Abimelech finally captured the city, killed its people, and leveled it to the ground. The people at the nearby town of Migdol saw what was happening and took refuge in the fort next to the temple of Baal-berith. When Abimelech learned of this, he led his forces to Mount Zalmon, where he began chopping a bundle of firewood and placed it upon his shoulder. "Do as I have done," he told his men. So each of them quickly cut a bundle and carried it back to the town where, following Abimelech's example, the bundles were piled against the walls of the fort and set on fire. So all the people inside died, about 1,000 men and women. Abimelech next attacked the city of Thebez and captured it. However, there was a fort inside the city, and the entire population fled into it, barricaded the gates, and climbed to the top of the roof to watch. But as Abimelech was preparing to burn it, listen to this, a woman on the roof threw down a millstone. It landed on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. "Kill me," he groaned to his youthful armor-bearer. "Never let it be said that a woman killed Abimelech." So the young man pierced him with his sword, and he died. When his men saw that he was dead, they disbanded and returned to their homes. Thus God punished both Abimelech and the men of Shechem for their sin of murdering Gibeon's 70 sons. So the curse of Jotham, Gideon's son, came true. And that is Judges chapter 9. Be sure your sin will find you out. And, people think they're going to get away with stuff, but they're really not. There's going to come a day of judgment. And so it's best to draw close to God, obey him, and be close and stay close to him. You don't want to get on his bad side. Psalm 39. I said to myself, I'm going to quit complaining. I'll keep quiet, especially when the ungodly are around me. But as I stood there silently, the turmoil within me grew to the bursting point. The more I mused, the hotter the fires inside. Then at last I spoke and pled with God. Lord, help me to realize how brief my time on earth will be. Help me to know that I am here but for a moment more. My life is no longer than my hand. My whole lifetime is but a moment to you. Proud man, frail as breath, a shadow, and all his busy rushing ends in nothing. He heaps up riches for someone else to spend, and so, Lord, my only hope is in you. Save me from being overpowered by my sins, for even fools will mock me then. Lord, I am speechless before you. I will not open my mouth to speak one word of complaint, for my punishment is from you. Lord, don't hit me anymore. I am exhausted beneath your hand. When you punish a man for his sins, he is destroyed, for he is as fragile as a moth-infested cloth. Yes, man is frail as breath. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Listen to my cry. Don't sit back, unmindful of my tears, for I am your guest. I am a traveler passing through the earth as all my fathers were. Spare me, Lord. Let me recover and be filled with happiness again before my death. All right, that's Psalm 39. When we get done with Psalm, we'll start in Proverbs again. We've already read through Psalm and Proverbs, and now we're back in Psalm. We'll just keep going back and forth. Okay, let's go over to the New Testament, and we're moving right along here. We're in James, the book of James, in chapter 3. We've already read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, and now we're in the book of James. So if you keep watching every day, I try to repeat those because repetition will hopefully bring, memorization for you. And you'll memorize all 66 of the books of the Bible. James 3. Dear brothers, don't be too eager to tell others their faults, For we all make many mistakes. And when we teachers of religion, who should know better, do wrong, our punishment will be greater than it would be for others. So people want to be a teacher, they want to be a preacher, and apostle and prophet. Don't you know that those fivefold ministers are going to be judged more severely than, especially the teachers, than just normal born-again believers? So I don't know why people want a mic in their hands so bad, you know? If you're called of God, you're going to know it, and you're not going to get away from it easily. It's going to be on your mind all the time, and you're going to feel that call. And there's so many self-appointed fivefold ministers out there. It's unbelievable. It's like, why do you do that? Why don't you just be the best Christian you can be? Why don't you just be the best born-again believer that you can be? Everybody should be reconciling other people to God. But, we're all called to reconcile people to Jesus, but we're not all called to preach, to like in the fivefold ministers positions. The apostles, the prophets, the pastors, the teachers, and the evangelists. That's fivefold ministers. Our job is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. So, if anyone can control his tongue, it proves that he was perfect. He has perfect control over himself in every other way. We can make a large horse turn around and go wherever we want by means of a small bit in his mouth. And a tiny rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot wants it to go, even though the winds are strong. So also the tongue is a small thing, but what an enormous damage it can do. A great forest can be set on fire by one tiny spark. It only takes a spark to get a fire going, right? And the tongue is a flame of fire. It is full of wickedness and poisons every part of the body. And the tongue is set on fire by hell itself and can turn our whole lives into a blazing flame of destruction and disaster. The Bible says that life and death are in the power of the tongue, and you're going to eat whatever comes out of it. Kenneth Copeland always said that our words were not made for communication, but for creation. So you create your world by the words that you speak. That's why you should be slow to speak. You should be slow to speak. Our pastor, Zach, he always says you have one mouth and two ears. That means you should listen more than you talk. And then the Bible says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So whatever is in your heart is eventually going to come out. You may start out sounding all religious and pious and everything, but eventually, if you talk long enough, what is in your heart is going to come out. I've met some big ministers that said, when they meet somebody, they just let them talk. And then eventually, and that's how you find somebody's heart. Just let them talk. And whatever comes rambling out of their mouth is what's in them, whether it be good or bad. But we should use our tongue to create, and say good things and not tear down. And, there's times we have to speak up, and I get in trouble all the time. Well, then you should, you're hate speech, you're a racist, you're blah, 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 and it's like, you don't even know what you're talking about. There's a time to stand for truth. There's a time to stand for righteousness. And just because you're a born-again believer and you are full of God's love doesn't mean that you just let people trample on you or you let injustice come up. There's a time to stand against your government when they're tyrants, and when they're trying to destroy your country. Absolutely, you need to stand up against that, And there's times when you have false teachers that you need to maybe, correct or whatever. So, yeah, there's times, but you have to be careful what you say. And you need to create with your mouth. Create your world. If all you talk about is bad things and all the pain that you have and the poverty that you're in and, your family's a mess and everything, that's exactly what you're going to have. Until you start speaking in faith good things over your life and your family, things aren't going to change. Men have trained, we're in chapter 3 verse of James, verse 7. Men have trained or can train every kind of animal or bird that lives and every kind of reptile and fish, but no human being can tame the tongue. It's always ready to pour out its deadly poison. Sometimes it praises our Heavenly Father, and sometimes it breaks out into curses against men who are made like God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Dear brothers, surely this is not right. Does a spring of water bubble out first with fresh water and then with bitter water? Can you pick olives from a fig tree or figs from a grapevine? No, and you can't draw fresh water from a salty pool. If you are wise, live a life of steady goodness so that only good deeds will pour forth. And if you don't brag about them, then you will be truly wise. And by all means, don't brag about being wise and good if you are bitter and jealous and selfish. That is the worst sort of lie. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, inspired by the devil. For wherever there is jealousy or selfish ambition, there will be disorder and every other kind of evil. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure and full of quiet gentleness. Then it is peace-loving and courteous. It allows discussion and is willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and good deeds. It is wholehearted and straightforward and sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of goodness. And that is day 220 of the daily Bible reading. And I'm going to go ahead and get off of here, and I'll see you on here tomorrow with day 221. So keep reading, and have a good rest of your day. God bless you.